What is up, everyone? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we will be reacting to the history of supercars in 10 minutes. Now this is going to be like the first video I think that I've done where it isn't on like an actual motorsport race itself. It's just on like supercars, and I'm actually really looking forward to it because one of you requested I think like a similar video to this, and then I think one of you requested this video, and I was like, am I gonna like span out and do videos on cars in general as well as motorsport races? But I feel like I've nearly had this channel for a year now, which is crazy. So I was like, why not? The channel's on motorsport and cars, so why don't I make some videos on cars and the history of cars in general? So one of you did request the history of supercars in 10 minutes, so we're going to get into the video. I'm just going to shut up and we'll get straight into it.
The definition of a supercar is highly debated. My definition is very liberal. If it even slightly fits into what I said at the start of the video, then I'm pretty much happy to call it a supercar, or at least consider it maybe one. But for some, the title supercar is only given to a very special set of cars. Even dictionaries differ on their definitions, some saying that cars have to have centrally mounted engines, which excludes all of these cars currently on screen right now. Others saying they are high-performance sports cars, which could include all of these cars on screen right now. And in my opinion, the best definition actually comes from Urban Dictionary, as it notes a whole bunch of the key features of a supercar. Performance, rarity, the fact that the term is subjective, and also the fact that people can change their minds over whether a car is a supercar as time goes by. Whatever opinion you have on what makes a supercar, let's have a look at how this started and where it's developed to. As if the definition of a supercar wasn't hotly debated enough, what constitutes the first ever supercar is just as debated. Was it the Lamborghini Miura or Ford GT40 of the 1960s? Wow, look at them. The 300 SL of the 1950s? Or even as far back as the 1909 Blitzen-Benz, which held the land speed record of 126 miles per hour at the time. Let's look at the facts. The Blitzen was made specifically as a race car to beat the world high-speed record. So if we applied the same logic to today's cars, we probably wouldn't consider the Bloodhound SSC to be a supercar. And anyway, the first reference to an actual supercar came 11 years after the Blitzen-Benz. This came with the Ensign 6, which appeared in the Times newspaper
how long it is
on the 11th of November 1920 with the words, "If you are interested in a supercar, you cannot afford to ignore the claims of the Ensign 6. It had a 6.7 litre high-performance engine for the time, similar to the Bentley Speed 6. But just because the word supercar was used, it doesn't necessarily mean the car was a supercar. In the 1920s and 30s, owning a car really wasn't the norm, so having any kind of car was a pretty big flex in and of itself. For that reason, the ultimate cars of the time were actually grand tourers that could take you further distances in more comfort. That's very different to today, where the ultimate cars are considered to be supercars or hypercars or whatever. Following World War II though, with people wanting to escape the grim history of the war that they just lived through, people started to like the idea of enjoying themselves out on the roads in a nice fast car, and so came the emergence of the sports car. These are much more akin to what we see today in terms of being light, luxurious, high performance, and generally strong for the time. These include the Ferrari 116S, the Aston Martin DB1, Alfa Romeo 660, Porsche 356, and the Jaguar XK120, which was arguably the gold standard of a sports car in that era. These sports cars opened the doors for manufacturers to start thinking about how they could develop this further. How could they beat the other manufacturers at making fast, sporty, and luxurious cars? It's pretty simple. More power, more performance, and more luxury. This leads me to what I consider to be the first ever supercar. I believe the 1954 Mercedes 300 SL to be out here as the first proper supercar, in that it was the most advanced, most expensive, the fastest, and most beautiful car of its time, and is loved and renowned even through to today. It had flamboyant, iconic doors too, which is a staple of exotic supercars today, and by stepping above the competition, the 300 SL showed manufacturers that there was an appetite amongst the wealthy petrol heads for more cars like this, and opened the doors for the emergence of some undisputed supercars in the 1960s. And the 60s certainly started to show the signs of modern supercars. So I mentioned the GT40, it was a homologation car for Le Mans, and Ford wasn't a brand that was renowned for luxury cars. In many ways though, it still fits that definition I mentioned at the start of the video. Its legacy has led to cars like the Ford GT and the Ford GT, and they are very much considered to be supercars. Then along came the Italians. The Lamborghini Miura, first produced in 1966, was actually made to be more of a race-inspired grand tourer than the straight-up race car for the road. Those beautiful curved lines and transverse transversely mounted mid-place V12, the bonnet and the boot that open in an extra manner, and the fact that only 764 were ever built. Clearly well on the supercar route that we see today. But the 1960s
I'm actually going to cry, they're so beautiful.
Car that also took the supercar name. Over the pond in the US, the cars that we would call muscle cars, they were starting to call supercars. In US car magazines from the 60s, there are references to the 60s supercars, the supercar club, and the supercar street racer gang market segment. Cars were even directly named supercars, like the AMC SC Rambler, where the SC stands for supercar. But one of the reasons for the decline of the muscle car at the time also almost put a stop to the supercars that we know today, the fuel crisis. Prices of oil quadrupled almost overnight, and the huge engines of muscle cars and these budding supercars were no longer economically viable for even the wealthy individuals that would otherwise have bought them. This brought about much smaller cars with smaller, more practical engines and fuel bills. But supercars powered through this, and they returned with a different trend: sharp, rugged lines, unlike those that we saw on the Miura. The 1971 Di Tommaso Pantera, the 1971 Maserati Bora, the 1976 Lotus Esprit, and the 1978 BMW M1 are all great examples of this change in design language. But it's the 1974 Lamborghini Countach which remains the poster car
how
of this
the
era.
nose
Alongside
got lower.
Lamborghini, though, Ferrari started to push their cars into this space, like the
For, like,
365
speed and
GT4
aerodynamics,
was a mix
it's crazy.
of those curved lines of the 60s and the sharp ones of the 70s. All this growth in sports and supercars meant that in the 1980s, when a financial boom hit, resulting from the deregulation ideology from Reagan and Thatcher, supercars gained in popularity and increased in price. This, in part, led to the introduction of the hypercar market, as manufacturers wanted to really go above and beyond for those wealthier clients. And it was a great opportunity to test out new technology. Ferrari came through with the F40, the first production car to do over 200 miles per hour, and just before this, Porsche had already hit us with the 959, which could do 197 miles per hour. Both had twin turbocharged engines, which helped them to put that power right up. What these cars did is set the standard for supercars in the following years. They had to have more power, hit higher speeds, and look even more beautiful. On a level below the F40 though was the Ferrari Testarossa. It was criticised for lacking performance and not feeling as focused as other supercars of the time, but the key factor in its success and the reason why it remains a well-known car to today is that beauty factor. Iconic looks seem to be enough to ensure that a car would remain loved for years to come. This may be why the 288 GTO lacks the love and attention that the Testarossa gets in popular culture, despite being a far more capable Ferrari. In the 1990s, the number of manufacturers embedding supercars into their lineups increased, while the purpose of supercars started to grow. The Honda NSX showed that supercars could be reliable and used daily, while hypercars proved that they could be the exact opposite, but be ridiculously quick, like the XJ220 and the EV110.
Oh my god.
This purpose also spilled out into other types of cars, like the super saloon segment with the Lotus Carlton, for example. The 90s really cemented supercar as a household name. Some standout cars include the F50, the GT1, the F1, and the Diablo, amongst many others. Some petrolheads named
that transition from like the 80s to 90s is crazy.
Make their prices increase year on year a ridiculous amount. Look at the McLaren F1, for example. Tell me when the McLaren P1 is going to be anywhere near as valuable as that car. I don't know if it ever will be, but we'll have to see. So because the 90s cemented these cars, by the 2000s, supercars were pretty much expected from most luxury manufacturers. The two factors that dominated the 2000s were decreased weight and increased power. And these trends trickled their way down to the more modest offerings by manufacturers. Performance SUVs became a thing, for example. Following these trends, Ferrari and Porsche pushed the boundaries of power, with the CGT putting out 605 brake horsepower and the Enzo dropping 660. Madness for the time. We even got the first electric supercar, the Venturi Fetid.
Wow.
As the
that came in the 2000s.
began between Koenigsegg and Bugatti, more affordable supercars also hit the market, like the Audi R8 and the Nissan GTR, both sitting on that grey area between super high performance sports cars and supercars. Manufacturers that hadn't previously tried to put out supercars also tried their hands. The Lexus LFA, which is different to pretty much every Lexus to have ever existed,
I've
iconic,
never seen that before.
only for that incredible sound. I know I'm biased because it's the era that I grew up in, but the 2000s for me is the absolute golden era of supercars. You've got some very special cars like the Enzo, CCX, Zonda, SLR McLaren,
They do look
LFA,
very cool.
CGT, Veyron and Murcielago, while having the higher production supercars that are still sought after today, like the Gallardo, R8 and GTR. Despite this being the golden era of supercars, in my opinion, the 2010s have probably seen objectively better supercars for people to go out and buy. Once the market began to recover after the recession in 2008, brands began to carve their own niches into the supercar sector. Ferrari uses its wealth of history to create an exclusive set of supercars where you need to be on their list to get the best tier of cars. Lamborghini, now owned by Audi, continue their tradition of making a car, then making a bunch of special editions of it, but maintaining those mad designs that they're renowned for.
They're just so beautiful.
Starts pushing out a new car almost yearly, which some say eroded the brand, while others say it has pushed the manufacturer to make some insane new
I love a McLaren, I'm sorry.
The 911 as good as it can possibly be, with the GT3 and the GT2 RSs. And the new technological advancements available began to make their way into hypercars, like the hybrid engines in the LaFerrari, P1 and 918. And now we sit on the horizon of electric supercars like those from Rimac, Lotus, Tesla and Porsche. We're watching the advent of supercars as we know them up until now, and a potentially massive change to what makes supercars special in the not too distant future.
That was very educational. Because I obviously didn't know like the beginning of like supercars all the way back to like 1909, I think he said there, to now is crazy. And if you were to put pictures of like the first supercars from like the 1950s or whatever, and then put a picture of supercars now, it's just nuts, the transition that we've had. It just looks really cool. Like if I had to pick one supercar that I would want, as much as I am a raging Ferrari fan and they do look beautiful, I love the McLaren P1. Like if I could ever get my hands on one of those, 100% I'd be getting a P1. I've always said, like growing up, like realistically, okay, it's not realistic, but like more realistic compared to me owning a McLaren P1, my like dream car to have would be a Nissan 370Z. And if you don't know what that is, please look it up, okay? Because I've watched so many people like on TikTok and like YouTube videos of people like souping them up and putting like their own spin on them, and I just absolutely love them. But then when I actually looked into it, you can't have them in the UK anymore because like it goes above the decibel limit on the roads, which is like really depressing. But that would have been my dream car anyway. But yeah, I really loved that video. I'm so glad that one of you requested it. And with that being said, if you have any other videos that you'd like me to react to, drop them in the comments and work my way through everybody's suggestions at the moment. If you did want to check out any of my other socials or become a Patreon member and get early access to videos like this or top priority of your suggestions, then you can do all of that down below. But I hope you enjoyed today's reaction, and I will catch you next time for the next one. Bye.